Elite anti-terror killing teams run by America's intelligence agency have now taken the US-led war beyond Afghanistan. Those are the claims in a new book called Obama's Wars by veteran journalist Bob Woodward. He reveals that a secret army of some 3,000 Afghan fighters sent to hunt al-Qaeda and the Taliban have now infiltrated Pakistan. Well, let's talk more about this with our correspondent Paula Sleer in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, tonight for us. Paula, hi there. The fact that the CIA has been managing a covert army in Afghanistan has never been a particularly guarded secret, though, has it?
No, Kevin, it hasn't. I mean, US officials for some time have been talking quite openly and brazenly about secret armies operating here. Although these officials speak anonymously, some of them have gone so far as to actually brag and boast that some of their most effective counterinsurgent efforts have been thanks to groups like this. Now, in a book that will be released next week entitled Obama's Wars, written by Bob Woodward, he suggests that there are as many as 3,000 Afghan assassins who have been directly trained and funded by the CIA to carry out clandestine operations in which they capture and kill al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters and leaders here in Afghanistan and also across the border in Pakistan. And this is something that is not going to go down well with Islamabad. There has always been a red light on US forces operating here in Afghanistan not to cross over into Pakistan. And this, coupled with the fact that the US has been firing missiles from unmanned US drone aircraft at a rate higher than the Bush administration, does point to an enlargement of the US President Barack Obama's covert war in the region. I mean, you need to remember that we're talking about a paramilitary group the size of an army brigade. It also directly links to a strategy review at the end of November 2009 in which the US President Barack Obama said that it was a priority to directly wipe out al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban, particularly in these enclaves along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border.
So, Paula, what is the best educated thought about what will happen to these heavily armed units when the Americans eventually do lose interest in the region?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. What does happen to these heavily trained, heavily equipped and heavily funded groups if and when the US loses interest in this part of the world? This is a decades-old strategy. We're not talking about something new. We're talking about a system when, for whatever reasons, it is not politically or economically or militarily viable for the United States to take some kind of direct action. It employs proxy armies. The same thing, or a very similar type of operation, happened in Iraq against al-Qaeda there. We saw the same thing happening back in the 1980s here in Afghanistan when the CIA sponsored Mujahideen to take on the Soviets. And very often people refer to this as the Salvador option, a throwback to the 70s and 80s when the US sponsored death squads in countries in Latin America to take on its enemies. Here in Afghanistan, many people suspect that when we're talking about these 3,000 Afghan assassins, we're talking about the private militia of warlords who operate here today.
OK, well, Paula Sleer, thanks for bringing us that update there from Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. More on it too. Ahmed Quraishi from the think tank Project for Pakistan in the 21st Century says that the death squads may become a major source of problems for both Afghanistan and Pakistan.
The United States continues to rely on warlords in Afghanistan. When I heard about this mercenary force of 3,000 well-trained Afghans, there's one part of the story that is still missing, and that is where these 3,000 Afghan volunteers for this mercenary army came from. And I have no doubt about the answer to this question, and that is they came and they were recommended by some of the warlords. Of course, as you know, there's a problem of loyalty in Afghanistan. You cannot recruit people without knowing exactly where they're coming from. So most of this 3,000 force must have come recommended from some of the warlords. And these warlords are really milking the US government and the US military. They're making a lot of money. And of course, we all know the story of what happened in Tora Bora back in November and in December 2001 when Osama bin Laden actually escaped from Tora Bora, thanks actually to the very allies of the US military, the Afghan warlords, who some of them, according to reports, took money and let many, almost 1,000 al-Qaeda fighters really escape. So these are really shifting loyalties, and these 3,000 fighters must have come from somewhere, and they must have loyalties to some warlords inside Afghanistan. And this confirms actually that we will have problems about these militias and these mercenaries getting out of control at some point in the future.